Before there were computers, animation was all done by drawing on paper, cleaned up on animation cells, then shot on cameras against backgrounds one frame at a time. It is a slow, tedious, and difficult process, and I think it's so freaking cool. Most animation these days is done on computer, which is still a difficult and tedious process, but saves time on specific things, like being able to play back your animation by clicking a play button, instead of having to shoot your animation by camera before previewing it. And being able to color with the click of a mouse, instead of handcraftingly painting every animation cell. My goal with this video is of course to teach you how to animate on paper, but I also want to try and convey why it's still relevant and important to try at least once in your life. Or, if nothing else, just show you how cool and special this unlost art is. We're going to be doing it just as the old school Disney and Animate animators did it, with a peg bar and animation paper. If you'd like to try paper animation without investing any money into it, may I suggest my flipbook animation tutorial, which I'll leave in the video description below. It's a great place to start if you're paper curious at all. To animate on paper, we're going to need 4 things. A light box so we can see our previous drawings, a peg bar, so we can keep all of our papers in place and drawings all lined up. Here I have 2, the old school Acme style peg bar, and a standard 3-hole punch style peg bar. There's not really a ton of difference between Acme and 3-hole punch, both are gonna work practically the same. I just like the Acme one because of the old school feel of it. Animation paper, which you can buy pre-punched or punch your own. If you want to punch your own and you have a standard peg bar, it'd be as simple as just buying a 3-hole punch, which you can find in any office supply store. If you'd like to do the Acme style peg bar, I have a link to an Acme style hole puncher in the video description below. Keep in mind it's quite expensive because this is a very niche kind of hole punch. So you're looking to spend around $300. But actually, for an animation hole punch, that's a very reasonable cost. They can sometimes go upwards of $1,200 or more. But like I said, if you have the 3-hole punch one, that's perfectly fine. And of course, pencils. I like using these red and blue erasable colored pencils for undersketching, and then a graphite or an ebony pencil for doing darker and cleanup lines. The links for these will be in the video description below. Sometimes you can find these supplies in local art stores, and I always encourage supporting your local art stores as much as you can. But animation supplies are getting harder and harder to find in person these days, so I will leave affiliate and non-affiliate links on how you can buy these products online. If you use my affiliate links, it sends a little extra cash my way at no extra cost to you, and it supports me as a content creator, and I super appreciate that. Use whatever link feels right for you. So with all of our supplies in order, let's just animate something simple so you have an idea of how all this works. For my peg bar, to keep it from sliding around, I like having it taped to my light box. I use blue painter's tape or masking tape so it doesn't leave a bunch of gunk if I need to remove it for any reason. And you'll notice I keep my peg bar at the bottom of the light table. Let's start with something simple. I'm going to take my first piece of animation paper and line it up and place it on the peg bar. We're going to draw just a pair of googly eyes. You can follow the same style of cartoony eyes that I'm doing, or do whatever style of eyes you like to draw. Feel free to make it as detailed, stylized, or as simple as you want. Just keep in mind, you're going to be drawing this over and over and over again. That's how animation works. So the more lines you draw, the more times you're going to have to replicate it. I'm going to draw my eyeballs just like this, with eyebrows up above it. Feel free to copy mine. Since this is our first storytelling pose, we're calling this a keyframe. Keyframes are kind of like our extreme poses when a character moves around. In animation, we typically indicate a keyframe by writing what frame number it happens on with a little circle around it. This is our first keyframe on frame 1, so we're going to write a 1 and draw a circle around it. And hey, that's our first keyframe done. So for animation, it's typically shot at 24 frames per second. That's 24 drawings for every 1 second of animation. Think about that next time you're watching an animated movie and how much work and patience that must take. For traditional animation, like in Disney and Looney Tunes style, it's often shot on what's called twos. That means that one drawing is exposed for 2 frames. So that gives us 12 drawings instead of 24 per second. So for this animation, we're going to do several different kinds of exposures. Blinks are pretty fast, right? So we're going to mix in some 1s, some 2s, and even some 3s in this animation, just so you can see what those different exposures look like. Because I've animated blinks probably a billion times, I know exactly how I want it to go. But this isn't always going to be the case. Sometimes animation is just going to take some trial and error to figure out the timing and the spacing of what it is you're animating. And that's okay. You can feel free to follow along with my spacing and timing, or try experimenting experimenting with your own style of blink. In animation, typically we have what's called an anticipation before movement. This is something I personally like putting into a blink. This is something that's felt more than seen. It's having the eyes open up just a little bit right before closing down to blink. So I'm going to have an anticipation frame happen on frame 3, where the eyes open up just a little bit. And even though they're circular eyeballs, I'm still thinking of them as having top eyelids and bottom eyelids. So eyes opening up, they're going to open up from the top eyelids, and the bottom eyelids are going to stay in relatively the same place. And there's our anticipation frame. And then for the closed eyes, I'm going to have this on frame 6. So I'm going to draw my eyes, again, thinking about the top eyelid closing down onto the bottom eyelid. And I'm just going to draw the eyes as two kind of flat U shapes, and then have the eyebrows go down along with them. To do my in-betweens, I'm going to teach you guys something cool. You may have seen these little charts on the side of pencil tests. These are often called timing charts, but I think that's misleading. I much prefer to call these spacing charts, because they are more describing how close the in-between drawing is to one frame or the other. I like using the term favoring, but this is also called easing. This is really easy to show with our blink example. Our first keyframe is our eyes all the way open, and our next keyframe is our eyes all the way closed. If we wanted to have our in-between not favor one keyframe or the other and be perfectly in the middle, we would add a tick in the middle of our spacing chart. To show that it's a 50% in between, we also add a little double arch, just so there's no guesswork about it. This would make our eye in between look like this, perfectly in the middle. If we take this tick and we move it closer to our first keyframe, then it would be favoring the first keyframe. We don't add arches to this because it's not a 50% in between anymore, right? So if our easing is charted out like this, then our in between drawing would look like this, favoring our first keyframe. And likewise, if we move the tick to the end of the chart, that means we favor the next keyframe, and it would make our in-between drawing look more like this. Obviously, charts can have as many in-betweens as you want, and we can use arches to have finer and finer 50% in-betweens. I thought a blink would be a really good way to show how these spacing charts work, and you can see why I like to call these spacing charts. The timing or where these drawings happen on the timeline could be anything. That's not what these charts are for. They're there to tell you or the assistant which frame to favor when doing the in-betweens. So now that you know about spacing charts, we're going to draw one for this keyframe, our anticipation into our closed eye position. We're going to draw our chart so that it favors the closed position, and we're only going to have one in between for it. And since it's so quick, we only want it to be exposed for one frame, so we're going to mark this as happening on frame number 5, which is one frame right before our closed position on frame 6. We're going to draw this in-between as being closer to the closed eye position than the open one, just like we indicated with our spacing chart from before. So that'll look something like this. And we're going to mark that as frame number 5. And we don't put a circle around it because this isn't a keyframe, right? This is an in-between. So we don't need any kind of circle or indication around the number. And that's our first in-between done. For our next in-between, what I want to do is I want to have the closed eye position stay on screen for 3 frames. And then I'm going to do 2 in-betweens to go from closed back into our drawing number 1, or our first key pose. So the spacing chart for this is going to look like this. I'm going to draw one pose as being a 50% in between, and then the last pose is going to be completely favoring the open eye position to give it sort of a soft ease out into the open eye position, so it kind of cushions into the eye open position. So how would I tackle these in-betweens? Well, first, I like to do my big 50% in-betweens first before doing any favoring drawings. So we're going to do that first. We'll do a 50% drawing from the closed position to the open default position. And that's going to happen on frame 9, since I wanted my closed position to last for 3 frames. And that's going to look something like this. And then for my last favoring pose, I like to have that be sort of a soft cushion, so I'm going to have that, instead of being on 1s, I'm going to have that be on 2s, just so it lasts a little bit longer before easing into the default open eye position again. So this is going to happen on frame 10. And then on frame 12 is where we'll have the open default position. So by the end of this, you should have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 drawings. And if you do, congratulations! You've just done what's called pose-to-pose animation. So that's where you first take your key poses and then figure out the in-betweens in between them. In motion, the blink looks like this if you set it to the same timing that I was going with. So for shooting your animation, obviously we're going to have to do something different because we've drawn it on paper and we have to turn it into a video file somehow. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it and there's no wrong way to do it. Whatever you figure out, I'm sure would be fine, but here's how I personally do it. So first, I use my phone to capture all of my paper animation footage because it's good enough for what we're trying to do. So find a way to rig up your phone so that it sits above your paper animation and try to make it as parallel as possible. The setup that I use is just because this is what I had lying around my house. I have a microphone stand with a phone holder at the end of it, but there's much simpler ways to do this than what I have here. For example, you could attach it to a tripod and hang it off the edge of a chair and keep your paper on the floor. But once you have your phone in place and you're ready to take pictures, the app that I've been using is called Stop Motion Studio. For the features that I use on it, it does require a payment of, I think it was like $6 to unlock all the features for it, and that was worth it to me. But if you don't want to pay for an app, Flip-a-Clip has features where you can import pictures as well. I just don't like it as much because it requires a lot more finger presses, a lot more clicks per picture to import, and if you're shooting a lot of paper animation, that could get very old very quick, so it's worth it to me to use Stop Motion Studio instead. So when you start Stop Motion Studio, to start capturing your animation, select the plus button here to create a new movie. The very first thing you should do in your animation before you do anything else is set your frame rate. While recording this the first time, I set my frame rate after capturing my footage and setting all of the timing, and then found out the frame rate was set to 5 frames per second, and after changing it to 24, it messed all of my timing up. So let's do this first. Let's set up our frame rate for our animation. To do this, click the gear icon in the bottom left, then select the speedometer icon. For this animation, we're animating at 24 frames per second, so let's select that. Now that we have our frame rate set, let's capture our animation. Once you have your camera in a placement you're happy with, we can start shooting frames by selecting the camera icon on the top right. Simply snap a photo either by tapping the red button or by using a Bluetooth device. Change your animation paper to the next drawing and then snap the next picture, and continue doing that until all of your animation has been captured. Remember that our animation ends in a loop, so I'm going to shoot frame number 1 as our last frame as well. You can also take your photos using your default camera app and import them later. I use my video game controller to capture my frames when I'm doing this, and the default camera app seems to be the only way that this works, so that's the way I tend to do it. To import photos that you took this way, simply click this plus button on the left and then select Add Images to bring in any photos that you took. Once you have all of your frames brought into Stop Motion Studio and you have your frame rate set, now we can start timing them out. Our first frame is marked as 1 and our next frame is marked as 3, which means our first drawing needs to hold for 2 frames. Probably the easiest method would be to capture our first drawing 2 times when we're taking our pictures, and then it would automatically have the correct timing that way. But we can also set the amount of time to hold by selecting the frame in the timeline, selecting pause, and then select how many frames the drawing will hold for. In this blink example, our first drawing holds for 2 frames, so that means we're going to select that it pauses for 2 times. Our second drawing also holds for 2 frames, so we're going to select also pause for 2 times. Our third drawing is only exposed for 1 frame, so we don't need to set a pause for that one. Our fourth drawing, which is our extreme closed eye position, that's exposed for 3 frames, so we're going to select a pause for 3 times, so it holds for 3 frames. Then the next drawing after that's only exposed for 1 frame, and the drawing after that is held for 2 frames before looping back to our final frame, which is our frame number 1 reuse drawing. And that one we can hold for as long as we want to. I'm just going to select a random number of 10 here. And then when we play back our animation, it looks like this. How cool. We've got a finished blinking animation, all done on paper the old school way. Obviously, we want to export this as a video so that we can share it around on Discord or email it to our moms. So to do that, we can select this back arrow on the top left to go back into our projects view. Then you want to press and hold on your animation project that you just created, and then select Save As. It should select movie by default, but you can also export it as an animated GIF if you want, but we'll select movie for this example. Select Next on the top right, it'll take a second to render, and then select where you want to save it on your phone. And there you go! Now we have our finished paper animation exported as a video. Paper animation is really cool, so make sure to show it off. If you'd like to share it with me on social media, I'd love to see it. My username is @JesseJJones for most places, so feel free to send it to me. I'd love to see your guys' work. And from beginning to end, that's how you do paper animation. The rest of it's going to be up to you and experimenting with it and trying to learn more. If you'd like to learn more about paper animation or animation in general, a really good resource is Skillshare, which is the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is an amazing platform that teaches you not just drawing and animation, but also how to run a business, how to be a freelance artist, good social media practices, how to stay productive and not procrastinate. Skillshare is an amazing platform. I really like the classes I've learned on here. Some of my favorites have been How to Paint by Marco Bucci. I've also really liked the classes on storytelling to tell my own original stories. The class I'd like to highlight today is How to Design Characters with Jazza. Jazza's another animation/art YouTuber that you may know. He taught me so many tips and tricks back in the day with Flash, so I was excited to see him teaching on here with Skillshare. He goes over things like the fundamentals of design, his personal process with designing characters, and how to take those concepts to create a whole cast of characters for your show or original story. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. You could get started today. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked what you saw, give the video a like, and if you'd like to stay tuned for more animation help, be sure to hit that subscribe button with the bell to stay updated on future tutorials. If you'd like to learn more about paper animation or any other subject, please leave a comment below letting me know what else you'd like to learn. Good luck, have fun, and happy animating. Until next time, bye-bye! Be sure to click here to subscribe to my channel to stay updated on future videos and tutorials. If you'd like to help support my work, you can click here to visit my Patreon page. You also get access to rewards like early access to tutorials, source animation files, and access to a secret Patreon-only chat room. Keep on animating, and until next time, bye-bye!